President Trump has once again pulled the handbrake on his economic train, signalling an executive order to delay a surge in US tariffs on Chinese goods for another 90 days. And this reprieve, signed just hours before the previous truce was due to expire, means tariffs will not revert to the punishing April levels, a move that avoids, for now, reigniting the full-scale trade war between the world's two largest economies. On the surface, this is presented as pragmatic diplomacy, the outcome of talks in Stockholm late last month between the US and Chinese trade negotiators. But when you dig deeper, the 90-day delay raises questions about strategy, leverage, and the increasingly transactional nature of US trade policy under Trump. Had Trump allowed the deadline to lapse, US duties on Chinese imports could have soared back to as high as 245%, while China was prepared to retaliate with tariffs of up to 125%. This was not an abstract threat. It would have jolted supply chains, raised consumer prices, and directly hit politically sensitive constituencies such as US farmers, whose soybeans, beef, and pork have been targeted by Beijing. Trump's own messaging underlines the electoral dimension. The public call for China to quadruple its soybean purchases is not just an economic request, but a political calculation. Chinese retaliation has been aimed squarely at rural America, the heartland of Trump's political base, in a bid to weaken his domestic standing. By pausing tariffs, Trump buys breathing space for these farmers, though without resolving the underlying dispute. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this round of talks is the separate but related deal with Nvidia and AMD, both companies which had been banned from selling certain AI-compatible chips to China on national security grounds, will now be allowed to do so in exchange for paying 15% of their China-related revenue to the US government. This is unprecedented, effectively monetizing export permissions. And critics see this as a policy for sale, a dangerous precedent in which access to foreign markets is mediated through direct payments to the government, blurring the lines between tariffs, licensing, and corporate taxation. And the national security question, this is a major contradiction. The chips in question, NVIDIA's H20 and AMD's M1308, were previously banned precisely because of fears that they could enhance China's AI and military capabilities. Now the administration argues that their sale will not compromise national security, a shift that coincides with intense corporate lobbying. This volte-face raises doubts about whether US security policy is being shaped more by strategic assessments or by corporate access to the Oval Office. So the winners are China, which gains access to key AI hardware during the tech race. US farmers, at least temporarily, spared the worst retaliatory tariffs, and the US Treasury, which stands to collect up to $2 billion from the chip revenue deal. The losers are the credibility of US trade and security policy, now seen as negotiable for a price, the long-term leverage as Beijing learns that US tariff threats can be deferred with concessions, and consumers who will still bear the brunt of substantial share of tariff costs if talks fail. Goldman Sachs projects up to 67% pass-through to prices. And supporters of Trump's approach might call this adaptability, the ability to shift tactics quickly to secure gains. Critics would say it's incoherence, policy driven by short-term political calculations, ad hoc deals, and opaque negotiations. If tariffs are meant to be a bargaining tool, constant extensions dilute their power. Each 90-day pause creates uncertainty for business planning years ahead, from chip makers to commodity exporters. And this pause now expires on November the 9th. That's just long enough for markets to hope for a deal, but short enough to keep pressure on Beijing. The risk is that absent, if there's not a substantive agreement, both sides will again threaten escalation, perpetuating a cycle of brinkmanship that undermines global trade stability. This 90-day delay is not a resolution, it's a temporary ceasefire in a war that has no clear end game. And Trump has kept the threat alive, but at the cost of signalling that tariffs are negotiable and that US policy can be swayed by corporate deals. The question now is whether this is leverage being preserved or squandered, and by November, I suppose we'll know if this was the calm before a breakthrough or simply another pause before the next ridiculous tariff storm.